guys, so today we're going to start something a little bit different. Last time we started working in Maya and we made a house. Now that house isn't going to be very useful in our Mars environment, it's probably going to feel a little bit out of place. So today we're going to make something that's pretty forgivable and easy. If you make a mistake, it won't be the end of the world, but it will be a usable asset that we can put on Mars. So we're simply going to make a rock that might actually belong on the surface of Mars. Did you know that some of the rocks on Mars actually have names? Certainly not all of them, but there are a lot. So let's look for a list of named Mars rocks. And of course, Wikipedia has what we want. So here's some notable rocks on Mars. I want you to actually pick one of these as some reference for what we're going to be working on today. I like the look of Yogi over here, so I'm going to try to make a rock that looks something like Yogi. Now, I could simply keep this off to the side or in a window and come back to it whenever I want, or I could actually put this image into Maya so that I can use it as part of my reference. Just to show you how to do that, I'll save this onto my desktop. Into Maya once again. Let's talk about how we can get that image in here so we can use it as a reference. Also, a couple controls that I didn't go over in the review is if we want to look at our scene in more than just the perspective view, we can use this icon right down here to see it from the top, front, side, and perspective views at the same time. And we can use the icon just above it to return to a single view. Another way to make this switch is to simply tap spacebar. And then if you want to focus on a single view, say I want to look at my object from the side, I can put my mouse and hover it over the side view, and then tap spacebar, and I'll jump into the side view. Tap spacebar again to go out to all the views, and again if I want to go back to perspective. Now how about getting that image in here? Well, the image that I'm looking at doesn't look like it was taken from the top. I'd say maybe this is something like a side view. So I'm going to put this into the side view window in Maya. Unfortunately, this isn't going to be quite as easy as in Photoshop where I could just drag and drop it in. That's just not going to work in Maya. So how do we get this to work? In our side view, we'll see it has its own menu and its own options. So up here in my side view, I want to click on View. Then go down to Image Plane, it's very near the bottom. And then go to Import Image, because that's what we're using, an image. Now I'll go find that image on my desktop and click Open. And now I have this image here that I can use as reference. I can even try to model right on top of it, or just keep it nearby to look at. And I can move, scale, and rotate this image just like I could anything else inside of Maya. Now, it's important to remember that in game design, we want to make our models as simple as possible while still representing the object that we're trying to create, because games can only render so much at one time. So we're going to start with the simplest shape possible. Yes, to make this rock, we're going to start with just a cube. In fact, everything in game design starts from being just a cube. Even the most advanced character models that you see in games like Grand Theft Auto and Gears of War, Call of Duty, all of those characters, all of those trees and weapons, all of that was once just a cube. So how are we going to take a shape as simple as this and turn it into something that looks like a rock with jagged edges and lots of little details? Well, we definitely don't have enough faces and edges and vertexes to work with right now. Even if I were to go into face mode and try to start adjusting some of these things, I just don't have enough different surfaces to create something that looks like this rock. Yet. And keep in mind that the really fine details are something that will be painted on when we get to UVs. So things like these little tiny dings and very small edges and corners, those we don't need to worry about modeling. We want to get the big basic shape and then we'll paint on the little stuff. So let's figure out a way to get some more edges onto our cube so that we can start actually building something that looks more like this rock. One of the easiest ways to do this is to go up to Mesh Tools and then go down to Insert Edge Loop. Once I click on Insert Edge Loop, I can click on any existing edge and create a new edge that intersects with it. So I'm going to give myself a few new edges to work with. I'm going to do it on this side as well. Alright, let's start with something like this and see what we can do now going into our edges, vertexes, and faces, using our moving and scaling to rearrange and try to build something that looks more like our rock named Yogi over here. Alright, so we've come a long way from our cube, and it certainly doesn't resemble a cube very much anymore. But I'm not sure that it quite resembles the rock that I'm aiming for yet either. It's still looking very geometric. So I'm going to show you another tool that we can use to add edges now. Once again, we can go up to Mesh Tools, and then go down to Multi-Cut Tool. It's just a little bit below our Insert Edge loop. It looks kind of like a razor blade cutting on an orange line. Clicking on this, I can start to create edges wherever I need them. So I select a point to start my edge, and a point where my edge should end, and then I press Enter to complete that edge. And my edge can have more than just 2 points. Here I've clicked on 4 different locations before hitting Enter, and I have a new line. And now I have a new edge that comes down right here. So I've created some new edges to add some more detail, but this hasn't really changed the shape yet. All I've done at this point is create more edges. Now I need to go actually select these new edges and vertices and manipulate them in ways that will actually help my rock look a little more like a rock. Okay, so I don't know if I could say that this is perfect, but it sure doesn't look like a cube. Kinda looks like it could be a rock. And I don't want to make this intensely complicated right now, or add too much geometry. So let's call this good enough. And let's get ready to start to actually paint this to make it look more like a rock. Which, you should already know, means we're gonna go take a look at our UVs. So, with my object selected in object mode, I go to UV and UV editor. Selecting my object one more time, you'll see that this still is laid out almost as if it's a cube. And let's go turn on our checker map and see how that turns out on the surface. So our checker map is still recognizable. We can see the checkers, though they are looking somewhat stretched out, especially in areas like this. You can see these long rectangles. Any texture that we put on this surface is really going to be stretched out and going to reduce the realism and convincingness of our textures. Any areas that are really stretched out like this, it's really going to stretch out our texture, and that's going to reduce its effectiveness, its ability to make it look real. So let's go ahead and try an automatic map. Once again to UV, and then automatic. And this seems to have done a really solid job. We have almost perfect squares everywhere that we look. A few small stretches at edges like this. We might be able to get away with that, or we may try to fix it yet. So let's go look at what our new UV looks like. You can now see the different sections of our rock laid out here. A good way to see what belongs where. When I'm hovering in face mode, I can see to an extent. I could also use my 2-finger click and go into UV shell mode. And now if I click on this large shell down here and go back to my scene view, I can see, okay, that right there is the entire back of my rock. So whatever I want on the back, I can paint right there. This shell here takes up a large portion of the front of my rock, and this chunk right here really covers this indentation that I made. Now there are some smaller sections, and painting these individually could get a little bit tricky. Let's see if we can't move and sew these in a way that makes them easier to paint. And you'll also notice, because these are so far spread out on our map, the textures don't really line up. You can see how one pattern ends here and another pattern starts here. And that could make it kind of difficult to make it look seamless once we start painting our own texture on there. So let's take something like this, and let's go into edge mode. I'm going to click and then shift click these edges, and you can see all these edges exist in two places. So let's try a cut and sew and move and sew and see if that looks any better. I'd say that's an improvement. You can see the pattern now actually connects here and wraps around. There's a little bit of stretching, but I think it's going to be okay. And we could still even tweak that face by face if we need to. Let's look at some of these other little sections and see if we can't get them to line up a little bit better. Now you can do that by looking over here in the scene and looking for bad edges and bad seams, or you can do it over here in your UV editor and just find small shells and then see where they're at in your scene. I'm going to try and sew this edge in with a larger one and see if that isn't an improvement. I'd say that's better. That's going to end up easier to paint, and it'll look better in the end. Okay, originally I was hoping that I could squeeze all of this into one video, getting the texture and the UV done, but it looks like we're already pushing past the 10-minute mark for this video, so I'm going to call this here and make a separate video for putting the UVs into Photoshop, painting them, and getting them back into Maya. So check back for that. Alright, good luck with this section, and I'll show you the rest soon.